Hey guys, Farmer Jesse here. So no matter if you're a homesteader or a professional grower, growing summer lettuce is always kind of a good idea, right? Like lettuce tastes delicious in the summer with your tomatoes and your peppers and all those good things, but it also sells really well at market. So it's worth investing a little time in growing summer lettuce. So let's talk about how to do it. First, I just want to say before we jump into this video, if you like this kind of content, make sure to subscribe. Also, I want to give a shout out to the sort of my micro mentors on summer growing in terms of lettuce production, and I'm going to link to all their Instagrams below because they're really inspiring farmers in general, and you should just get to know them if you want to be if you want to be a professional grower, or you are a professional grower. Eric Schultz from Steadfast Farm has been a huge inspiration to me. I interviewed him last year for a Growing for Market article. I also interviewed Ray Tyler, who wrote a little ebook about some tips on summer growing. And then also Elliot Seldner, who I've already shouted out in a video, who helped me with that same article, and he is at Fair Share Farm in North Carolina. So check them out. I'll link to all of them in the show notes, and all right, let's talk about this summer lettuce thing. So the first thing you really have to consider when it comes to growing summer lettuce is the seed. It's not just any lettuce grows in the summer. You need to have one that is sort of adapted for summer growing, slightly higher germination temperature, or has is slower to bolt, doesn't get as bitter. That can be an issue with summer lettuce. So the first thing is selecting the right seed. We grow a few different ones. Right now, we're really heavy on Salanova, which is the one that is right here below me. Salanova has been a really good crop for us so far this year. It's really our first year with it. We did a lot of summer varieties last year and we had some good luck with it, but we're really trying Salanova this year full on. So I'm excited about it so far. The yield has been good and we've really liked the flavor and the texture. They hold up really well. Like if you're selling this to chefs, they're gonna really love how it stands up on the plate. So selecting summer hardy crops is definitely gonna be your first line of defense against the heat. Your second line of defense is really gonna be not direct seeding. You can direct seed it in the summertime if you hit the timing right and you're in the right environment. Lettuce has something called thermal dormancy. So essentially it goes dormant beyond a certain temperature. And I think that temperature is roughly 80 to 85 degrees. But when it eclipses that temperature, when the soil eclipses that temperature, it won't germinate. So you really need to think about that when it comes to starting your own lettuce. I think it's good to point out that thermal dormancy element, the same thing applies to start. So if you start a bunch of soil blocks or a bunch of cell trays and then put them in your greenhouse where it's 90 degrees or 100 degrees, they're not going to germinate any better than they will in the field. We often put ours in the cooler overnight. Another tip I got from Ray Tyler, one of many, is put them in the cooler overnight or put them in the cellar, and that's what Elliot Seldner was doing at least for a while, or build a germination chamber to kind of get them to that optimal range where they're more likely to germinate at a higher percentage. So we'll actually put ours in the cooler overnight and then take them out and leave them in the shed, in our little wash pack shed, which is covered on a concrete slab. So it's cooler and it's a more consistent temperature, and we almost always have great germination. I mean, 99%. This is lettuce right here, right there, that we direct seeded. We direct seeded that when the temperatures were going to be, a little bit more mild. We had a nice cold front come through about, I guess it was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago. So we were able to direct seed a little bit of lettuce. I like the direct seeding because I can use the quick cut greens harvester on it, and the harvest goes really fast. So I don't necessarily think that direct seeding is always the best option for summer growing. In fact, I really like transplants. We're moving away a lot from doing any sort of direct seeding any more than we have to. Things like carrots, some lettuce in the spring and that sort of thing, but we really like transplants. So you can see here's a bunch of transplants. That's a lettuce right there. We just stuck in the middle of, these are herbs, dill here, and then cilantro and basil and some other things in this line. But then we snuck in a cat, and we snuck in some Salanova there. Because the transplants, you can harden them off in the sun. So this is something, we'll go look at my greenhouse in a second, but basically you want to grow your transplants as big as possible. The bigger the transplant, the better the survival. Like the better the transplant, not the bigger, but the better the transplant, the better their survival. So you want to grow as nice of a transplant as you can so that when you stick it in the soil, it's kind of halfway there or a quarter of the way there. When it comes to actually producing good starts, is that you want to make sure to harden them off. Is leaving them out in the sun, you know, in the hot heat of the sun for as long as you can, a few days at least. You need to keep them misted that whole time. You need to make sure that the crop is getting lots of watering and cooling off, but it has to get adapted to that really, really hot sun after it comes out of the greenhouse. So let me show you. We don't have any hardening off right now. We should, but maybe I'll do that today. So we've got some lettuce in here that's just in the greenhouse, which we have remay draped over our greenhouse to kind of block a little bit of the intensity of the sun. So we've got lettuce there, and then we've got lettuce here getting ready to go out. I'm talking about healthy transplants. I mean, I'm talking about we do everything in soil blocks. Let me put that in so it'll focus on it. So we do everything in soil blocks, and that gives us a really healthy transplant. So when we're putting these out, you know, they're not too leggy, they're really healthy and robust. I mean, that's a pretty healthy plant. And we like to do that. We like to do them in soil blocks because we just feel like we get a better product, and we can hold it for longer. Like these are over a week past due. You know, they're probably 10 or 12 days past needing to get in the field, but we had to wait until one of our blocks is ready. So yeah, they're just kind of hanging out and they look great. So I'm super excited because they're not gonna be that much further behind the half of the tray that we already planted. They're just gonna go in right after that. And it's important, no matter if you're growing lettuce for market or you're growing it just for yourself, to think about summer lettuce in succession. You may not get that second cut off of it. We start some every single week in order to ensure that we have it every single week to harvest from. And that'll fluctuate as this fall gets nearer. We'll have to do less every week because we can get second cuttings from our lettuce and sometimes even third cuttings. All right, so let's get a little bit more linear on this. You're starting with good transplants, and when you're gonna harden them off, and then you want to get them into the field under some shade if possible. Like some people use shade cloth, 30 or 50% shade cloth. You don't want to use it for the whole time, but you do want to use it in that establishment phase. And it's a good way to essentially get that crop established and get its roots in the soil before it has time to kind of get damaged from the sun, from the heat. So that's the first thing, is getting it into the soil after a good hardening off, underneath some shade. We actually use, you can see here, the lighting is crazy. See here, we've cut some of these out, but this is, we underplant our, I've done a video on this already, but we interplant our lettuce below celery. And the goal with interplanting it like that, underplanting it, is actually simple. It's just to kind of provide a natural shade cloth. So that's how we establish our lettuce, and that's what, you know, the lettuce that you see me cutting off of was established under celery. It's in what we call our everbed. I also want to say that one really underrated place to grow summer lettuce is actually not out in the field, it's in your tunnels. That seems counterintuitive in a way, but what people kind of forget about plastic is it's a little bit of a shade. You can sort of demonstrate this by all I did was I got behind the plastic. There's a big thing of plastic right there where the light is coming through, and it dropped the intensity of the sun considerably. So that's just something to think about. Like if you have a tunnel and your cucumbers are done or your tomatoes are done, throw in around a lettuce real quick, and it'll add, it doesn't intensify it, it actually adds a little bit of shade. So it's a great way to grow summer lettuce. I specifically planted sweet corn in here, not because it's a very profitable crop or it doesn't yield very high. You get 2 ears off each one of these, but I put it in here as a sort of annual hedgerow to kind of add a little bit of coolness. Like all that underneath it'll be shaded a little bit, not really shading the lettuce, but shading the soil around it and offering a little bit of coolness under there. And keeping the lettuce cool is a big part of keeping it growing. And I do want to emphasize before transplanting, you got to think about your soil tilth. You know, we're doing no-till, so we essentially have a blanket of compost, of like kind of mulchier compost, that we're just shoving the transplants into. If you're not doing that, you need to make sure that the tilth is nice, that it's fairly fertile, but it doesn't have to be high fertility. It's not a heavy feeder. It can come, if you have a heavy feeder before that, broccoli or something, you really don't even have to compost it, maybe just lightly with some chicken manure or something like that. And some people actually use like a landscape fabric, which we do a little bit. We do use a little landscape fabric. I don't have anything against it. It's a really good, it's reusable, and it's a really good way to block out weeds and that sort of thing, and also hold in moisture. I think it's a good idea when you can to use some sort of fabric or some sort of mulch that will keep it from being in direct contact with the soil. You can see in these first few plants that I cut that I'm leaving quite a bit around the bottom, but what you can't really see in the video is there's a little bit of rot right there. So I'm just kind of skipping over that rot. And so those first few, just because we got a ton of rain recently, it got a little bit of this kind of yellowing rot on the bottom, but otherwise the head was great. I still got a fairly good yield per head, even though I had to, kind of skip through some of that in the beginning. But a lot of people will use a landscape fabric, plant into that, and then you may end up with a little bit less of that rot. So once you have it in the ground, you have, your lettuce already in the soil, the next thing you really have to think about is keeping it watered and keeping it misted. When I say misted, I mean, we live in Kentucky, so in a hot summer, it can be really intense on your crops. So, you need to think about how you're gonna cool those crops off. And one of the things I definitely suggest in terms of that is having some overhead irrigation that you can turn on in the middle of the day, or several times a day, especially when it's super hot. So I just turn on the irrigation for 5 or 10 minutes, just get everything misted and cooled down. I probably do it 5 times a day. And it was 93 degrees yesterday, and it probably, 5, 6 times maybe yesterday, just during the heat of the summer. If it doesn't cool down below 85 degrees, below that sort of growth period of 80-ish, lettuce isn't gonna grow if the soil's over 80 degrees. So when it gets to that point, you really wanna think about doing some night irrigation, some really, really nice cold water, so that in the morning when the sun's starting to come up, the soil's not too hot, you cool that soil and that plant down and it'll start growing or keep growing. And then you wanna keep water on it too. I don't use drip irrigation, but you could, and you maybe should. I usually water pretty heavily at night and then let that get soaked in all through the morning and all through the evening. And then, do that as needed, depending on how dry the soil is. But then I also use the misting. When it comes to harvesting, you really, generally you want to harvest it when it's cool. So that may be at night. Some people harvest at night. There are some studies that show that, it extends the shelf life. I don't know. I think that you might want to experiment a little bit with that on your own, whatever varieties you're choosing. That may be variety specific. Harvesting at night just may create, intensify that sort of latex, that white stuff that you see when you cut lettuce. It may just intensify that a little bit and bring it up. So I would just be cautious about harvesting at night. I've never tried it myself, so experiment with it. Let me know if you do it, if you like doing that. Let me know, because I'm curious myself. But for the most part, most people harvest super early in the morning when the crop is already cool. And, with the Salanova, we harvest, with a knife, and you kind of go around and get just the best looking stuff. With the direct seeded stuff, you generally harvest it with a harvester because it's faster. In the summer, like I said, it's harder to get that direct seeded stuff because you really have to time it well. Getting it cooled down is another thing. Like if it didn't get below 75 last night. So if you're getting it, that lettuce is essentially 75 degrees when it's coming out of the ground. So you want to get that cooled down to that 40 degree range as fast as possible. So that means either putting it in a tote and getting it in your cooler, getting it into really cold water is another really good option to get it kind of chilled down. That's gonna extend the shelf life and also keep it from getting any sort of bacterial issues or those sorts of things. Like keeping it cold and getting it cold fast helps to not only extend the shelf life, but also, is good for food safety. And if you're selling lettuce, something that people don't usually wash on their own, especially like a mixed lettuce, you really, really need to be concerned about food safety and making sure that you're diligent about that. Another important sort of post-harvest thing is that you want to get it dry. If you do wash it, you don't have to wash it if it's not above dirt, like if you have it in landscape fabric or something, and you're harvesting it, then you don't necessarily have to wash it, because that way you actually preserve the shelf life, especially if it's already clean. But you don't want to give it to anybody if it has that grit on it, or you don't want to eat it yourself. So you're going to want to cut it, and wash it and however, either after you've cooled it off or before it goes into the cooler, but you're gonna want to spin it as dry as possible. This is really important for, you know, food sanitation, just not to have it be wet, but also just for shelf life. And then, you know, a lot of people are using this sort of fan system. This is something that Curtis Stone has really pushed, and it's basically just a table with fans above it, and it blows all those little beads of water off, which is really important just to get as much of that off as possible to make it clean, dry, really fast, and cold. That's how you're gonna retain the most shelf life on it. And of course, you can just cut it as a head lettuce. There's nothing wrong with that. I like mixed greens. They tend to sell better for us at market, into restaurants, but you know, head lettuce is fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. Head lettuce, I like the transplant head lettuce, you know, cutting it as a mixed green, especially these sort of multi-leaf ones like the Salanova, because they get the flavor of a head lettuce without being a head lettuce, and you sometimes get multiple cuts from them depending on what the weather is like. One thing that I think is really important after you cut it is to use something like this tine rake weeder, to actually just scrape the soil. One of the micro mentors that I did not mention would be Ben Hartman, who I kind of learned this from, who after he cuts his greens will go through and just sort of lightly scratch off everything that dropped and put it into the aisle so that it doesn't rot on top of the crop, and you can get another cutting from it later. And that should be part of your routine when you're cutting lettuce. You know, packaging is all up to you. You can kind of do your own, you know, decide what you want to do for packaging. I recommend things that do not have holes in them. You know, anything that if air can get to the greens, it's gonna wilt them. You also want to keep them out of the sun when you're selling them or when you're, you know, offering them or those sorts of things. Other than that, guys, I'm gonna go make some breakfast. I shot this whole video in my PJs. And as always, if you like this video, please like this video. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and the little bell. That'll make sure that you get the updates. Share it with your friends. Leave us a comment. Leave us a question. Other than that, we'll see you guys later.